The rain hammered against the ancient wooden doors of Our Lady of Mercy Convent with the fury of a divine judgment, each drop echoing through the stone corridors like prayers whispered in desperation. It was nearly midnight when Sister Catherine heard the first tentative knock, so soft it might have been mistaken for the wind rattling the heavy oak. But something about the rhythm, 3 gentle taps, a pause, then 3 more, spoke of human need rather than natural force. At 34 years old, with 12 years of religious life behind her, Sister Catherine had learned to distinguish between the sounds of the night and the calls of those seeking sanctuary. The second series of knocks came stronger, more urgent, carrying with it a desperation that cut through the silence of the convent's sleeping quarters like a blade. Sister Catherine rose from her narrow bed, her bare feet touching the cold stone floor as she wrapped her simple brown habit around her shoulders. The rules of the convent were clear: no visitors after 8 in the evening, no exceptions without the Mother Superior's explicit permission, and absolutely no contact with the outside world that hadn't been previously approved and supervised. Yet something in those knocks spoke to a deeper law, one written not in the convent's constitution, but in the human heart. As she made her way through the darkened corridors, her footsteps muffled by years of practice in moving silently through the sacred spaces, Sister Catherine felt her pulse quicken with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The other sisters slept peacefully in their cells, trusting in the convent's walls to protect them from the chaos and suffering of the world beyond. But those knocks suggested that sometimes the world's pain found its way to their doorstep, demanding acknowledgement and response, regardless of institutional protocols. The heavy wooden door stood before her like a barrier between 2 worlds, the ordered, contemplative life of the convent and the messy, complicated reality of human existence. Sister Catherine pressed her ear against the wood, listening for any sound that might reveal the nature of the visitor who had come calling in the depths of the night. What she heard made her blood run cold, the soft, pained whimpering of a woman in distress, punctuated by words spoken in broken English, pleading for help, for mercy, for someone to answer her desperate call. When Sister Catherine finally opened the heavy convent door, the sight that greeted her challenged every assumption she had about the kind of emergencies that might arrive at their threshold. A young woman, perhaps no more than 19 or 20, stood swaying in the doorway, her clothes soaked through from the relentless rain, her dark hair plastered against a face that bore the unmistakable marks of exhaustion, fear, and something else that took Sister Catherine a moment to recognize: the particular strain of carrying new life under impossible circumstances. Elena Vasquez was 8 months pregnant, her swollen belly clearly visible beneath the thin jacket that provided little protection against the autumn storm. Her shoes were worn through in places, suggesting a long journey on foot, and her eyes held the hollow look of someone who had knocked on many doors only to find them closed to her need. Blood stained the fabric around her ankles, indicating that her situation was not just desperate, but potentially life-threatening. The young woman's hands trembled as she spoke, her words a mixture of Spanish and broken English that conveyed urgency, even when the exact meaning was unclear. "Por favor, ayúdame," Elena whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of the rain. "My baby. Something is wrong. The hospital, they say I need money first. Insurance, papers. I have nothing. Please, I heard that sometimes. That church people." Her words trailed off into a sob that seemed to come from the depths of her soul, a sound that spoke of doors slammed in her face, of bureaucratic barriers that stood between her and the medical care that could save her child's life. Sister Catherine felt every instinct of her training as a nurse, the career she had abandoned when she entered religious life, surged to the surface. Even in the dim light of the convent's entrance, she could see signs that suggested complications that required immediate attention. Elena's breathing was labored, her skin pale with an undertone that suggested dangerous blood loss, and the way she held her abdomen indicated pain that went beyond normal pregnancy discomfort. This was not a woman seeking charity or comfort. This was a mother and child in immediate medical crisis. The convent's rules regarding visitors, especially female visitors seeking help with pregnancy-related issues, were not arbitrary restrictions, but carefully crafted policies designed to protect both the religious community and the broader institution of the Catholic Church. Mother Superior Agnes had made these rules crystal clear during Sister Catherine's orientation 12 years earlier. The convent was a place of prayer and contemplation, not a social service agency, and any involvement in medical emergencies, particularly those involving reproductive health, could create legal liabilities and theological complications that would threaten the entire community's mission. Sister Catherine stood in the doorway, rain beginning to soak her own habit as she wrestled with the immediate conflict between institutional obedience and human compassion. Behind her lay the security of a life devoted to prayer, study, and service, within carefully defined boundaries. Before her stood a young woman whose life, and that of her unborn child, might depend on the decision made in the next few moments. The weight of her religious vows pressed down upon her like a physical burden. Obedience to legitimate authority, stability within the religious community, and conversion of life according to the rule of Saint Benedict. Yet Sister Catherine's previous life as a registered nurse had instilled in her a different set of obligations, ones that transcended institutional boundaries and spoke to fundamental human dignity. She had taken the Hippocratic Oath before she had taken religious vows, promising to first do no harm and to place the welfare of patients above personal considerations. That oath had never been formally rescinded when she entered religious life. It had simply been set aside in favor of what seemed like a higher calling to serve God through prayer and contemplation rather than direct medical intervention. The sound of Elena's labored breathing and the sight of blood seeping through her clothing made the abstract philosophical conflict suddenly, urgently real. This was not a theoretical question for theological debate, but a flesh and blood emergency that demanded immediate response. Sister Catherine realized that her moment of choice had arrived, the kind of decision that would define not just her own future, but her understanding of what it truly meant to serve God in a world where suffering often came knocking at midnight, seeking sanctuary from those who had dedicated their lives to love. Sister Catherine made her decision in the space between one heartbeat and the next, stepping aside to allow Elena into the convent's warm, dry interior, even as her mind raced through the potential consequences of this choice. The ancient stone walls that had sheltered contemplative religious women for over 2 centuries now harbored a desperate young mother whose very presence violated multiple convent regulations and diocesan policies. But as Sister Catherine guided Elena to a chair in the small reception area, she felt a clarity of purpose that transcended institutional concerns. "What is your name?" Sister Catherine asked softly, kneeling beside Elena's chair and taking her trembling hands in her own. The young woman's skin was cold and clammy, confirming Sister Catherine's growing concern that they were dealing with a serious medical emergency that required immediate intervention. "Elena," came the whispered response, followed by a stream of Spanish that Sister Catherine's limited language skills could only partially understand, but which clearly conveyed gratitude mixed with desperate fear for her unborn child. Sister Catherine's nursing training, dormant for over a decade but not forgotten, kicked into high gear as she performed a quick visual assessment of Elena's condition. The bleeding suggested possible placental complications, while Elena's pallor and rapid, shallow breathing indicated potential shock. These were symptoms that required immediate medical attention in a hospital setting. But Elena's earlier words about being turned away for lack of insurance and documentation suggested that traditional medical channels had already been exhausted. The practical challenges of providing care within the convent were staggering. The community had basic first aid supplies, but nothing approaching the equipment needed for obstetric emergencies. Sister Catherine would need to work with whatever resources were available while somehow keeping Elena's presence secret from the other sisters, at least until she could figure out how to address the inevitable discovery and institutional response. But first, she needed to stabilize Elena's condition and determine exactly what kind of medical crisis they were facing. Sister Catherine led Elena through the darkened corridors to the convent's small infirmary, a space designed for treating minor ailments among the sisters rather than handling obstetric emergencies. The room contained basic medical supplies, bandages, antiseptics, a blood pressure cuff and a stethoscope, along with over-the-counter medications and a few prescription drugs left over from treating elderly sisters with chronic conditions. It wasn't much, but Sister Catherine's experience had taught her that determined improvisation could sometimes accomplish what seemed impossible with limited resources. Eleanor's condition deteriorated rapidly once they reached the infirmary, her contractions becoming more frequent and intense, while the bleeding increased to levels that confirmed Sister Catherine's worst fears about placental complications. Working by the light of a small desk lamp to avoid attracting attention from other parts of the convent, Sister Catherine began the delicate process of providing emergency obstetric care with supplies and equipment that were wholly inadequate for the task at hand. The next several hours tested every skill Sister Catherine had acquired during her nursing career, as she worked to stabilize Elena's blood pressure, monitor the baby's heartbeat with an ancient stethoscope, and prepare for the possibility that she might need to assist with an emergency delivery under conditions that would have been considered primitive in any legitimate medical setting. Elena drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes crying out in Spanish words that Sister Catherine recognized as prayers to the Virgin Mary, sometimes gripping the nun's hand with desperate strength as another contraction seized her swollen body. As dawn approached, it became clear that Eleanor's labor was progressing too rapidly to allow for transfer to a hospital, even if one could be found that would accept an undocumented patient without immediate payment. Sister Catherine found herself preparing to deliver a baby in a convent infirmary, using sterilized kitchen knives as surgical instruments and torn bedsheets as surgical drapes, while praying to every saint she could remember for guidance and strength. The irony was not lost on her that she was about to participate in the miracle of birth in a place dedicated to women who had pledged to remain celibate and childless. Elena's baby was born just as the first rays of sunlight began filtering through the infirmary's small windows, arriving into the world with a strong cry that seemed to echo through the stone corridors of the ancient convent like a declaration of life's victory over institutional barriers. Sister Catherine's hands, steady despite the emotional turmoil of the night, received the tiny infant, a healthy baby girl whose arrival felt nothing short of miraculous given the circumstances of her birth and her mother's condition. The delivery had been complicated by Elena's blood loss and the less-than-ideal conditions, but both mother and child had survived what could easily have been a tragic outcome if Elena had been left to face her crisis alone on the streets. Sister Catherine's nursing skills, rusty from disuse but still fundamentally sound, had provided the expertise needed to navigate the emergency, while her faith had supplied the courage to act when institutional protocols would have demanded inaction. As Sister Catherine cleaned and wrapped the newborn in soft blankets borrowed from the convent's linen supply, she marveled at the baby's perfect features and strong vital signs. The infant's eyes, when they opened, seemed to look directly into the nun's soul, creating a connection that transcended the circumstances of their meeting. Elena, exhausted but conscious, reached out with trembling hands to hold her daughter for the first time, tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her face as she whispered words of thanksgiving in Spanish. The moment of quiet triumph was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside the infirmary, the unmistakable rhythm of Mother Superior Agnes making her morning rounds to check on any sisters who might be ill. Sister Catherine's heart raced as she realized that discovery was imminent, and with it would come all the consequences she had chosen to ignore in her focus on saving 2 lives. There was no way to hide what had happened, no possibility of explaining away the presence of a new mother and infant in the convent's medical facility. Mother Superior Agnes entered the infirmary, expecting to find it empty, or perhaps occupied by one of the elderly sisters with a minor ailment. Instead, she discovered a scene that challenged every assumption she held about proper convent management and religious discipline. Sister Catherine stood beside a makeshift delivery bed where a young Hispanic woman lay holding a newborn infant, the entire room bearing the unmistakable evidence of a birth that had taken place within the sacred walls of their contemplative community. The silence that followed Mother Superior Agnes's discovery stretched for long moments, filled with the weight of broken rules, violated protocols, and institutional liability that Sister Catherine's compassionate choice had created. The Mother Superior's face registered a complex mixture of shock, anger, and something that might have been fear as she processed the magnitude of what had occurred without her knowledge or permission. This was not merely a rule violation, but a fundamental challenge to the authority structure that governed every aspect of convent life. "Sister Catherine," Mother Superior Agnes said finally, her voice carrying the controlled tone of someone struggling to maintain composure in the face of an unprecedented crisis, "would you care to explain exactly what has transpired here?" The question was delivered with the formal courtesy that the Mother Superior used when addressing serious disciplinary matters, but underneath the polite phrasing lay an unmistakable demand for accountability that could not be deflected or minimized. Sister Catherine met her superior's gaze with steady eyes, knowing that this moment would define the rest of her religious life and possibly end her vocation entirely. "Mother Superior," she replied quietly, "this young woman came to our door in labor, with serious complications that threatened both her life and her child's. She had been turned away from the hospital because she lacks insurance and proper documentation. I provided emergency medical care and assisted with the delivery of her daughter." Mother Superior Agnes's response to Sister Catherine's explanation revealed the complex pressures that religious institutions face when individual acts of compassion conflict with institutional survival. As she examined the scene in the infirmary, the evidence of unauthorized medical procedures, the presence of an undocumented immigrant who had given birth on convent property, and the clear violation of multiple policies designed to protect the community from legal and financial liability. Her primary concern was not the welfare of Elena and her newborn child, but the potential consequences for the entire religious community. "Sister Catherine," the Mother Superior said, her voice heavy with disappointment and barely controlled anger, "do you have any idea what you have done? What liability you have exposed this community to? What scandal you may have brought upon our entire order?" Her questions reflected the reality that modern religious institutions, however devoted to spiritual matters, must operate within complex legal and regulatory frameworks that make spontaneous acts of charity potentially catastrophic for the broader community. The Mother Superior's concerns were not without foundation. If Elena or her baby suffered any complications related to the medical care provided by Sister Catherine, the convent could face malpractice lawsuits that would destroy their financial stability. If immigration authorities discovered that they had harbored an undocumented immigrant, they could face federal charges that would result in criminal liability for the leadership. If the diocese learned of unauthorized medical procedures performed on convent property, it could result in the closure of the entire community and the dispersal of sisters who had dedicated their lives to this particular expression of religious vocation. Yet as Mother Superior Agnes looked at the peaceful scene of Elena nursing her healthy newborn daughter, she also confronted the fundamental question that lay at the heart of religious life. What did it mean to serve God when institutional requirements conflicted with the immediate demands of human suffering? The answer to that question would determine not just Sister Catherine's future, but the soul of the entire religious community. The Mother Superior's next words would reveal whether the institution could expand to embrace the compassionate choice that Sister Catherine had made, or whether the demands of survival in the modern world had made such spontaneous acts of mercy too dangerous to tolerate within the walls of a contemporary religious community. The conversation that followed between Mother Superior Agnes and Sister Catherine took place in hushed tones, while Elena dozed with her newborn daughter, but its implications reverberated through every aspect of convent life and religious vocation. Mother Superior Agnes found herself confronting questions that seminary training and decades of administrative experience had not prepared her to answer. How could a religious community dedicated to serving God justify turning away a mother and child in crisis? Yet how could they responsibly expose their entire community to legal and financial risks that could destroy their ability to serve anyone? Sister Catherine's defense of her actions drew not on institutional policy, but on the fundamental gospel mandate to care for the most vulnerable members of society. Mother Superior, she said quietly, when Christ spoke of welcoming the stranger and caring for those in need, he didn't include exceptions for liability concerns or immigration status. This young woman came to us because she had nowhere else to turn. How could I have done anything other than what I did? The Mother Superior's response revealed the painful tension between prophetic witness and institutional survival that had become characteristic of religious life in the modern era. Sister Catherine, your compassion is admirable, but compassion without prudence can destroy our ability to serve anyone. If this convent is sued into bankruptcy or closed by federal authorities, how many people will we be able to help then? Sometimes the greater good requires us to make difficult choices that feel cruel in the moment, but preserve our capacity for service in the long term. As they spoke, Elena stirred in her makeshift bed, her eyes opening to focus on the two women whose conversation would determine her immediate future and that of her newborn daughter. She couldn't understand their English words, but the tone and body language conveyed the nature of their discussion clearly enough. She had placed herself and her child at the mercy of these religious women, and now their institutional concerns were weighing against her desperate need for continued sanctuary and support. What happened next would become a defining moment not just for Sister Catherine and Mother Superior Agnes, but for the entire community of Our Lady of Mercy Convent. As the two women continued their quiet but intense discussion about liability, protocol, and religious obligation, Elena's newborn daughter began to cry, not the lusty wail of a healthy infant demanding attention, but the weak, distressed cry that Sister Catherine immediately recognized as a sign of serious medical complications. Elena herself was showing signs of postpartum hemorrhaging that had been temporarily stabilized, but was now worsening, her skin taking on a grayish pallor that indicated dangerous blood loss. The makeshift medical care that had been sufficient for the emergency delivery was proving inadequate for ongoing postpartum complications that required professional medical intervention. Both mother and child needed immediate transfer to a hospital, but Elena's undocumented status and lack of insurance made such transfer problematic at best. Faced with an escalating medical emergency, Mother Superior Agnes found her abstract concerns about institutional liability suddenly overwhelmed by the immediate reality of two lives that hung in the balance. Whatever policies and protocols might dictate, she could not stand by and watch a mother and newborn child suffer or die because of bureaucratic concerns. The call she made to 911 represented not just a request for emergency medical assistance, but a fundamental choice about what kind of religious community Our Lady of Mercy would be. As they waited for the ambulance to arrive, Mother Superior Agnes made a series of rapid decisions that would have profound implications for the convent's future. She instructed Sister Catherine to accompany Elena to the hospital and to provide whatever support was needed, regardless of the potential complications. She prepared to contact the diocese and inform them of the situation, knowing that transparency would be essential for maintaining any credibility in the aftermath of these events. Most importantly, she began planning how the convent could provide ongoing support for Elena and her daughter, even if it meant challenging institutional policies and accepting legal and financial risks. 6 months later, Elena Vasquez had become an unofficial member of the Our Lady of Mercy convent community, living in a small apartment nearby that the sisters had helped her secure while she recovered from childbirth complications and worked toward legal documentation that would allow her to remain in the country. Her daughter, whom she had named Catherine, in honor of the sister who had saved both their lives, thrived under the care of women who had discovered that their contemplative vocation could be enriched rather than compromised by direct service to those in greatest need. Sister Catherine's actions that night had triggered a comprehensive review of convent policies and procedures, leading to the establishment of new protocols that balanced institutional responsibility with gospel mandates to serve the marginalized. The community had established partnerships with legal aid organizations, immigrant rights groups, and medical professionals who could provide expert assistance when similar emergencies arose. What had begun as one sister's spontaneous act of compassion had evolved into a systematic ministry that served dozens of vulnerable individuals while protecting the community from the legal and financial risks that Mother Superior Agnes had feared. The transformation had not been without costs. The convent faced increased scrutiny from diocesan authorities, criticism from some community members who felt that the sisters had exceeded their proper role, and ongoing financial pressures related to their expanded ministry. Sister Catherine herself underwent extensive review and additional training to ensure that any future medical interventions would meet professional standards. Yet these challenges were overshadowed by the profound sense of purpose that the community had discovered in serving those whom society had marginalized or forgotten. Elena's story had become a powerful testament to the possibility of institutional change when individual conscience challenged organizational inertia. Her successful integration into the community, her eventual legal documentation, and her daughter's healthy development demonstrated that compassionate risk-taking could produce outcomes that justified the initial leap of faith. The young woman who had arrived at the convent's door as a desperate stranger had become a bridge between the contemplative community and the broader world of human need that surrounded them. Mother Superior Agnes, reflecting on the events that had transformed her understanding of religious leadership, often spoke of how Elena's midnight arrival had forced the entire community to confront fundamental questions about the relationship between institutional survival and gospel witness. The crisis had revealed that true security came not from avoiding risk, but from aligning institutional policies with the deepest values that gave religious life its meaning and purpose. In choosing to embrace rather than reject the complications that Elena's presence had brought into their ordered lives, the Sisters of Our Lady of Mercy had discovered a more authentic expression of their vocation than they had ever imagined possible within the safety of their convent walls.